The town of Pembury, roughly 40 miles southeast of London, had absolutely no idea a sinister secret lurked in the shadows for over 3 decades. David Fuller, a family man who seemed like a simple next-door neighbor, led a double life that would soon shock and horrify the entire community. By day, he worked as an electrician at the Tunbridge Wells Hospital, but by night, he indulged in his twisted desires, committing heinous crimes that would haunt the families of his victims for the rest of their lives. As the necrophiliac electrician now sits behind bars, how was he able to deceive his family, employer, and authorities for so long, and how was he finally caught? This is the story of the worst ever necrophile killer. Wendy Nell. It was a typical evening for Wendy Nell and Ian Plass. They had spent the night at Mr. Plass's mother's house, laughing and enjoying each other's company. As the night drew to a close, Mr. Plass drove Miss Nell home on his motorcycle, the wind rushing past them as they sped through the streets. They shared a romantic kiss goodnight, and Ms. Nell waved him off from her porch, a smile still on her face. Little did they know it would be their last goodbye. The next day, Wendy Nell failed to show up to work. Her mother grew worried and called Mr. Plass at work, asking him to check in on her daughter. Mr. Plass rushed to Ms. Nell's flat in Guildford Road, his heart racing with every step. He arrived at the flat, but when he rang the bell, banged on the door, and called out her name, there was only silence. He became very uneasy as he realized something was terribly wrong, so he decided to take matters into his own hands. He pushed open a window and slipped into Ms. Nell's flat, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of her. And then he saw her. Ms. Nell was lying in bed, her head sticking out of the duvet. Mr. Plass approached her slowly, his heart heavy with dread. He stroked her hair, pulled back the duvet slightly, and lifted her arm, but she didn't move. A chill ran down his spine when he completely removed the duvet from her body. What he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. Wendy's body was naked, covered in blood, and brutally beaten. She had been forced into intercourse and strangled. The police were called, and soon the town was filled with detectives searching for clues. They found out that Wendy was the manager of a Supasnap store in Tunbridge Wells, the same one Fuller would often take photographs to be developed. But at the time, they didn't know that. So the only question on everyone's mind was, who could have committed such a heinous crime? The police were stumped, and as the days turned into weeks, the trail went cold. They had no idea this was just the beginning of a reign of terror that would last many years. Caroline Pierce. Just 5 months after Wendy's murder, another young woman disappeared. 20-year-old Caroline Pierce was a waitress at Buster Brown's restaurant. It was reported that she was last seen outside her bedsit home, but when her friends and family went to look for her, she was nowhere to be found. The police launched a widespread search operation, but it appeared that Caroline had somehow vanished into thin air. It wasn't until a farm worker stumbled upon her body in a flooded drain 40 miles away that the true horror of what had happened became clear. Just like Wendy Nell, Caroline's body was naked, except she had a pair of tights, but she had also been brutally murdered. The clear similarity between both murders and the state of the victims made the police realize the first thing they needed to know. Both women were killed by the same murderer. The police knew they had to catch the killer before he struck again, but as they got deeper into the investigation, they realized that they were not dealing with just anyone. There was a cunning and ruthless killer on the loose. Their investigations were difficult because forensic samples were scarce, and without a DNA database to help identify the killer, the police were left with few leads. Despite their best efforts, the operation was eventually scaled back, and the killer roamed free. The people of Kent had to live with knowing that they had a monster in their midst, and they spent each day terrified of when he would strike again. Unmasking the monster. For over 30 years, the mystery of both crimes was still unsolved, and they were called the bedsit murders because both women were killed in their bedsit homes. The uncertainty left families and friends of the victims with unanswered questions, but little did they know the true horror was only just beginning to unfold. Between 2005 and 2020, David Fuller struck several times again. He had intercourse with the bodies of at least 101 women and girls, with the victims ranging in age from just 9 to 100 years old. The sheer scale of Fuller's depravity is almost impossible to comprehend, but how did he commit these many unspeakable crimes and go unnoticed? You see, Fuller worked as a general maintenance worker at 2 hospitals in Kent, the Kent and Sussex Hospital and the Tunbridge Wells Hospital in Pembury. It was here that he had intercourse with dead bodies, using his Access All Areas swipe card to enter the morgue and prey on the bodies of the deceased. The morgue was a place of reverence and respect where families said their final goodbyes to loved ones, but for Fuller, it was a place of twisted desire and gratification. He would use his swipe card to gain entry to the post-mortem room, where the bodies were stored in fridges. The doors to these fridges were unlocked, allowing Fuller to access the corpses at will. It's terrifying even to think about, knowing that Fuller was able to do as he pleased in the morgue, preying on the bodies of the dead. To make matters worse, Fuller's job as a maintenance supervisor gave him the perfect cover for his crimes. He used legitimate reasons as excuses to visit the morgue, such as checking the temperature of the fridges. The mortuary staff, who worked from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., were unaware of the monster in their midst, and Fuller, on the other hand, worked from from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m., giving him a 3-hour window to commit his atrocities. Fuller also figured out that the post-mortem room, where the bodies were prepared for autopsy, was not visited by hospital staff outside of regular hours. The configuration of the rooms also worked in his favor, allowing him to enter the post-mortem room through the clinical office and leave unnoticed. To add to all of this, while CCTV cameras were covering other areas of the hospital, including the corridors leading to the mortuary, there were no CCTV cameras in the post-mortem room. The absence of the cameras was meant to preserve the dignity of the patients, but for Fuller, it was a blessing in disguise. He could open the fridge doors and access the bodies without fear of being caught. The swipe card system logs, which were recorded every time an employee entered or exited a room, were also not checked regularly. This allowed Fuller to make multiple trips to the mortuary without arousing suspicion, but fortunately for the rest of the world, and unfortunately for David Fuller, his luck ran out, and you're about to find out how the bedsit murderer was finally caught. Justice for the bedsit murders. The police had been investigating the cold case for years, and one word led them straight to Fuller's doorstep: DNA. In 2019, an enhanced DNA sample from Caroline Pierce's tights had been analyzed, but it was a sample from Wendy Nell's body that would ultimately lead police to the killer. The DNA sample was run through a national database, and the results were shocking. There was a close match to 90 people, but police detectives were able to narrow down the list, eventually identifying a relative of the killer. While the police were getting closer, they still didn't have the killer's identity. That was until they found a DNA match to a man named David Fuller. When police apprehended him at his residence, he denied knowing the two women, but his demeanor and behavior were clearly off. He was arrested in December 2020, and a DNA test confirmed that he was the killer. But little did investigators know that knowing the killer's identity would be the least of their surprises. As police searched Fuller's house and home office, they saw things they would forever remember. Hidden computer hard drives, CDs, and floppy disks contained more than 14 million images of intercourse offenses. But what was even more shocking was the content of the images. They included footage of Fuller having intercourse with dead bodies in the morgue at the Kent and Sussex Hospital and the Tunbridge Wells Hospital in Pembury. The police were horrified by what they had found, and the worst part was that besides the images being disturbing, they also revealed what a seemingly normal family man was capable of doing. Handwritten diaries found in Fuller's home office detailed his hospital victims, who ranged in age from a 9-year-old girl to a 100-year-old woman. But why had Fuller kept these disturbing images and diaries? When police asked him, he simply shrugged and said, "I don't know why." His response lacked any form of remorse or understanding of the gravity of his crimes. As the police continued to investigate, they realized that Fuller's crimes may have gone back even further than they initially thought. He had worked at the hospital since 1989, and the stored images only went back as far as 2008, so it's very likely he had been committing his crimes way before he started keeping mementos of them. He later confessed that his offenses only took place within the hospital setting, but the question of how or why he selected his victims is still unanswered. David Fuller eventually pleaded guilty to the 2 murders on the 6th day of his trial in 2021. He also admitted to 44 charges relating to 78 women and girls in mortuaries between 2008 and November 2020. As the trial came to a close, the families of David Fuller's victims were left to deal with the shocking revelation of his crimes, but they finally had a chance to confront him. One by one, they stood before him, their voices shaking with emotion as they described the pain and suffering he had caused. Addressing Fuller directly, one woman said, "David, I want you to know how much damage you have caused. Your sick and twisted behavior has damaged families like mine." The woman's words were echoed by another daughter of one of Fuller's victims, who said she kissed her mom to say goodbye, and that should have been the last human touch she had, full of love and devotion. Instead, it was David Fuller's vile touch. The courtroom fell silent, and the only sound that could be heard was the quiet sobbing of the families as they struggled to say their final words to his face. Another daughter stood before Fuller and pointedly accused him of stealing her memories of her mother's peaceful death. Her voice dropped to a whisper as she added, "I know it should not be my shame, but I still carry it. It should be your shame." David Fuller. One of the families of Fuller's victims that had the most media coverage was the Kamals. Nevres Kamal's daughter, Azra, had died at the age of 24 from severe trauma. Her body had been taken to the same mortuary where Fuller worked, and it was there that he had violated her. The first attack had happened just hours before Nevres had come to say farewell to her daughter, and it had happened again hours after she left. Nevres had spent 2 hours in the mortuary with her daughter because it gave her some sort of comfort. Little did she know that her daughter's dead body had been violated before that day and the evening of that day. The final assault Fuller committed with Azra lasted for 35 minutes. Kamal later told the media that her world was turned upside down when she discovered everything David Fuller did to her daughter, both in the mortuary and in his home. She revealed that Fuller had researched Azra online and may have even read the tribute she had written for her. The thought of Fuller invading her daughter's privacy, even in death, was too much to bear. But that was not all. Fuller had also photographed Azra's name on the mortuary record log, as well as her identity tags. The thing is, Fuller's modus operandi was to research his victims online after he had committed his heinous crimes. He would save the footage of his offenses in digital folders, sometimes even titling them with the victim's name. But there was one name that stood out in his browser history, a name that did not match any of the bodies that had been taken to the mortuary where Fuller worked. When questioned by police, Fuller could not explain why he had searched for this particular individual. Fuller's sentence and the aftermath of his arrest. The prosecutor, Libby Clark, summed up the case against Fuller, calling his actions depraved, disgusting, and dehumanizing. She also stressed that the extent of his drones has never been seen before in legal history. Finally, as the trial came to a close, Judge Mrs. Justice Chima Grubb handed down a whole-life prison term to Fuller in December 2021. The judge's words were simple and definite. David Fuller would spend the rest of his mortal life behind bars. The public shouted scum as a remorseless David Fuller was led away. When everyone thought the bedsit killer's story was over, as he began his life sentence, there was more information about his crimes. In November 2022, his official body count increased as prosecutor Michael Bisgrove revealed that Fuller had actually abused the bodies of at least 101 girls and women between 2005 and 2020. The aftermath of Fuller's arrest and sentencing was nothing short of devastating. Close family members of his victims were eligible to claim compensation of up to £32,000 for psychiatric trauma and any financial losses caused by his actions, but for Fuller's own family, the shame and embarrassment were too much to bear. His wife, Mala Fuller, revealed that she had left him after his arrest, unable to continue living with the man she had shared her life with for 20 years. She said she couldn't carry on in that relationship, and she was too upset to even think about or live with what was going on. As the dust settled on Fuller's sentencing, Detective Superintendent Ivan Beasley of Kent Police revealed that there was no evidence of any more victims of Fuller from the hospital mortuaries, but investigators had detected 99 potential victims, of which they knew the names of 78. The fear was that some of these victims may never be identified, and the true extent of Fuller's crimes may never be fully known. One thing is certain, though: David Fuller was and is the worst ever necrophile killer.